So you want to be a Lorcana judge, or you're about to be. Hello guys, and welcome to the Peanut Gallery. Today I'm doing a video that's not typical for this channel, but I feel like it's an important video for me to make personally, because coming up in about a week for me, from the date of I'm recording this, I'm going to be judging in the Lorcana Championship at one of my local game stores for set 3 into the Inklands here. So you want to be a judge. What does that mean? What are your responsibilities? What are the expectations of you? And what should you know? We're going to go over all of this stuff today, and you should walk away feeling pretty confident about your ability to judge these kind of matches. Now this is a competitive setting, so there are a lot of different things. So first we'll just kind of take a look over this Lorcana tournament guide for the championship match for Into the Inklands here, which I'll look over all this, I'll explain kind of what it means, and then we'll kind of jump into what is judging for Lorcana going to look like. I got a bunch of different rules, comprehensive rules, tournament rules, and play correction guidelines. So we're going to go over all of this information for you in this video. So this match is going to be quite important to people because it features one of the fan favorite Stitch. Anything Stitch people love, and this card especially is very nice looking, as well as incredibly useful. Now we haven't seen any decks in the meta run Rockstar Stitch yet, but I feel like it's coming. But also, this is just beautiful art. So these two things you see on the screen here, this mat and this card, are going to be the prizes for the champion. Now, first place and second place in each of these champion matches that take place at different stores across the United States and elsewhere are going to get a copy of this card and this champion mat. Now, second place is going to get a mat, but it doesn't say champion. But they'll also still get one of these promo cards. And then third and fourth place also get this promo enchanted Rockstar Stitch. And this is the only way to get these Rockstar Stitch promos. So if you win this tournament, it's going to be incredibly valuable for you. So that's a little overview of kind of like the prizes for this Into the Inklands tournament. If we go further down, we get into the details. Now this is where it's going to be a little bit more important for the judges. The format is constructed. That means you are expected to bring your own deck. Not only are you expected to bring your own deck, but you need to bring a deck list with you. Now judges, obviously you're not playing in this tournament, so bringing a deck list doesn't apply to you, but it is something that you're going to be looking for, because players can request deck checks and you as a judge will be performing those. So we'll go into a little bit more about what a deck check is later, but for now just know that it can happen. So rounds. Each round, or as I like to say, match. Round is equivalent to a match. You have 50 minutes and it's a best of 3 games. So best 2 out of 3. And so this is important. Top cut matches are untimed. What that means is if you get into this top cut down here, then you don't have a timer on these matches. So these matches can take a while. So if you end up in the top cut matches, make sure you take your time. Think your things through. Play your order of operations correctly. Now judges, you don't interfere with any of the matches unless you see an illegal play. Now you're not actively looking for an illegal play, and largely players are going to bring it up to you if there is an illegal play. So be there, be supportive, and we'll also discuss what illegal plays are as we continue further. So Swiss rounds are going to be what's timed, top cut are the untimed. Swiss rounds are going to be what determines the top cut. And at the tournament that I'm playing at, we've got 33 plus, so that means we're going to have a top 8. Or the tournament I'm judging, sorry, not playing at. So judges are required even if you have a small 8-player with a 3-round Swiss and you don't have a top cut. Still need a judge. Oh my gosh. Still need a judge. Judges are required. You cannot play. And you in quotes, need to be experienced in judging trading card events. That's okay. You're watching this because you're not experienced, and that's okay. You've still been selected by your store to judge the game. That means they think that you are qualified to run this tournament. Now in the future, certified judges will be established by Lorcana, and this is a great way to kind of dip your feet into the rules and understand what should I know going into judging and judging certification. So this is right before the Set 3 championship, so some rules are brought up to date. Every tournament they will probably release some new thing, so always check the Ravensburger website and make sure that you are up to date on the rules. But this is kind of to help me get my mind straight and keep my mind straight, and also to help screw yours on too. So let's go ahead and jump into the comprehensive rules here. So that's a little bit about the tournament that's going on and that we're going to be judging. Now here are the comprehensive rules. Now I'm just going to read through these. I'll explain things that I think that are kind of important. If you're watching this, you probably have a decent understanding of the rules already. But if you're judging, you need to have an in-depth understanding of the rules here. So let's go ahead and jump right into concepts here. Disney Lorcana cards are published in multiple languages for the purpose of gameplay. The English cards, rules, rulings, and clarifications are the official versions. So if you're playing Lorcana in a different language, the game is designed in English. The rules are meant to be interpreted in English. So what that means is, if you're judging a tournament in a different language, you should understand the implications of the rules as it relates to their English versions. Now, in general, card text and rules may be updated or corrected. So, Lorcana has a special document specifically for this. So far, I haven't seen anything on it. But the most updated and corrected information is the official version, even if the cards say otherwise. Like, look, guys, this is the most important thing. If Ravensburger decides, like, hey, we're going to update this card to change a little bit how the wording of it to make it more clear, or change how it works, you need to be playing according to the updated, corrected information. So, obviously, each person needs a legal deck of 60 cards. Each player needs a way to track their lore, and it can be any method that is convenient to players that is clear to the game. Now, this changes a little bit as we get into the tournament rules. In tournaments, you can bring paper, but it can only be used to track lore. That's it. You cannot be writing anything else on that paper. It's all supposed to be up in your head. Also, tournaments, technology is a no-no. So the only thing you should be using your phones for is reporting your score on Melee. Okay, golden rules. So if the text card of a game contradicts a game rule, the card effect supersedes that rule. This is going to be a majority of what you're doing as a judge, is determining how this order of operations plays out. So, for example, the game doesn't allow a character to challenge a ready character, but the player has an ability that reads the character can challenge ready characters. Well, they can challenge ready characters because the card text says it. If a rule or effect prevents something from happening, that rule or effect supersedes other rules and effects that allow it to happen. So what does that mean? That's a lot of confusing words strung together. An effect says that a player can't play actions. Another effect instructs a player that they may play an action for free. That player still can't play an action. So if something is out and prevents something globally from happening, what that means is it can't happen until that effect is gone. So whether that's till the end of turn, till the card leaves play, whatever the case is, if there's a prevention that prevents you from doing stuff, even though cards say that you can do the thing, you can't do the thing until the card that's preventing the thing leaves play or ends its effect. Now, Lorcana, some cards, it's not like you have to meet all of the conditions of the card in order to play the card. So that's where the do as much as you can comes into play. If an effect tells a player to do something, even if part of that effect can't be done, you do as much as possible. So for example, this card's Simba, Future King. When you play this character, you may draw a card, then choose and discard a card. If an effect would prevent you from drawing a card, you still choose and discard a card. Interesting implications there. This is where this is going to be the bread and butter of judging, is cases like this. Like, people are going to come, they're going to raise their hands, and they're going to call you over. It's going to be your job to determine in a quick and efficient manner how the gameplay should flow. And then players are expected to abide by that ruling. Now, the players can appeal to a head judge. Now, each tournament should have a head judge. If you're the head judge for this tournament, then it's up to you. If you're not the head judge and the players ask for an appeal to a head judge, then you get the head judge, you explain what's going on, bring them up to speed as quickly as possible, because the player's match timer is still ticking. So then you bring the head judge up to speed, and whatever the head judge decides is what's going to happen. Like, whatever they decide. Now, there's play correction guidelines, which we'll get into in a bit. You guys know what an opponent is. I really recommend reading this document through in depth, because this is going to be a lot of the bread and butter of judging. Anyone the active player is playing against is an opponent. Playing cards. Players can play a card whenever they're the active player, and there are no effects to resolve. To play a card, the player reveals it from their hand, pays the cost. Okay, so what does this mean? Players can play a card whenever they're the active player, and no effects to resolve. So I think it's important to bring this up. No effects to resolve. So effects go into the bag. Now, the bag is its own thing. It's just Lorcana's way. If you've played any other trading card game, I'm sure you have some similar thing that you can relate it to. Like in Magic, it's the stack, so on and so forth. So the way the game works is, if you're the active player and you play a card, boom. Alright, so now you've played that card, but that card triggered 3 effects, 2 for you, 1 for your opponent. So all 3 of those effects are going to be thrown up into the bag, and before you can do anything else, all of those effects need to be resolved. So first, you finish the effect from the card that you've just played. That has to be played through fully and completely before you can resolve any of the effects that were just thrown into the bag. Once it's resolved, now you go into the bag. So now the bag, you as the active player, so you got 2 effects you can resolve and the opponent has 1. The active player resolves all of their effects first. And so if the effect that you've just done from the bag triggers more effects to be thrown into the bag for you or your opponent, then before you choose the next thing to resolve in the bag, you now have, let's say you've got 2, so initially you have 2, your opponent has 1, you resolve 1 of your effects and now it grants you 2 more, and your opponent none. Then you would have 3 to choose from, and your opponent would still have 1, but your opponent can't go until you've cleared all of your effects. So then you would resolve all your effects till eventually there's nothing left in the bag for you, passes to your opponent gets to resolve all of their effects, and if the opponent's effects trigger something for you, then it would bounce back to you as the active player, you would do your effect, and then it would proceed back to the opponent if they have anything left in the bag. So it's always active player first. Always, always, always. The active player's bag needs to be empty before the opponent's bag can continue. So yeah, this is going to be a lot of like stuff that I recommend reading. This is kind of like judging in a nutshell. Cards a player brings to the table, their decks are their cards, and that player makes any decisions necessary for the card and its effects unless otherwise specified by an effect. So this is like, so if you don't have Pixelborn, I'd recommend getting Pixelborn and getting like a meta deck list and just playing with this meta deck, and you'll start to piece together this bag concept, and then how it can translate to your in-person matches. So his, her, its, their, when a card refers to any of those terms in relation to the player, it's referring to the person who played the card. When a card refers to his, its, or their turn, it's referring to your turn as the player. Your, and yours. Card effects address the player who played that card. So when it refers to those words, it's referring to the player of that card, even if the ability containing the reference was granted by an opposing effect. So what does that mean? Okay, so card effects address the player who played that card. So, as far as I know, there's currently not any cards that go over to your opponent's side. But in other trading card games like Magic the Gathering, you can impose a card onto your other people. So, card effects address the player who has played that card. Right, we understand that much. When a card refers to you, your, or yours, it's referring to the player of that card. Right. Even if the ability, the reference was granted by an opposing effects. Or even if the ability containing the reference was granted by an opposing effects. Your, yours, and yours. Okay, I'm struggling to come up with an in-game example, but this will rear its head when you see it, and it'll be very apparent. When a card refers to you, your, or yours, it's referring to the player of the card, even if the ability containing the reference was granted by an opposing effect. So I'm struggling to come up with a reference, but in the moment, I promise this will make a lot of sense. Game state check. So this is another thing. So these are all like little behind the scenes things that the game does that you as a judge need to be aware of, because this is the kind of stuff that affects the game, right? Set of conditions the game constantly checks for. The game makes these checks at the end of every step. After an action or ability is finished resolving, and after each effect in the bag is finished resolving. During a game state check, if one of the conditions is listed true, that creates a required action. Now, required actions are very interesting. I'm going to make this red because these are very so you need to be incredibly careful with these. Required actions must be performed immediately and don't go into the bag. So what does that mean? That means you don't get to choose. It happens immediately. But these are not typically effects granted by cards. Once a required action is completed, game state check occurs again. So this is kind of like, what this is saying is like game state checks are just constantly happening all of the time. All of the time game state checks happen. Abilities that trigger as a result of a game state check are added to the bag as soon as the check and any required actions are fully completed. So these are going to be abilities that happen based off of the cards in play as a result of a required action happening. If multiple required actions would happen at once, a single combined required action takes place. So what does this mean? So for example, in set 3, we were released locations. Locations are a required action. It's not a you may gain lore or anything like that. It's you gain lore. So the interpretation of that is you must gain lore. Right? So you gain lore. That is a required action. That is one of the required actions that the game is looking for. And let's say you have 3 locations in play. Then you gain lore for each of those 3 locations, provided they have lore values, at the same exact time. Whew. Okay, so what is... Now let's say you have a Queen's Castle and Neverland, for example. Neverland is a 1 lore location, and the Queen's Castle is a 2 lore location, and you have a character at the Queen's Castle. Okay, so this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. So now you would gain the lore for Neverland and for the Queen's Castle, so that 3 lore at the exact same time, and the May effect of drawing cards is thrown up into the bag. All at the same time. Gain the 3 and the effect is thrown into the bag at the same time. Now that's important because you don't draw before you gain the lore. As a judge, the expectation is like you're ensuring that people are gaining their lore, right? So if someone calls you over and is like, oh, they didn't gain their lore from their location at the beginning of the turn before they resolved their bag effect of drawing the card for the Queen's Castle. No, you get the lore. Like, the expectation is that you, or not you as the judge, but the active player and the opposing player are both checking for lore gain from locations from their opponent. So each person playing in that match is always looking to make sure that their opponent gains lore. If they don't see that their opponent has gained lore from their locations, or if they see that their opponent hasn't gained lore from locations, they are expected to tell their opponent so that their opponent can adjust their lore count. Not doing so, I would consider cheating. So that's my personal judge preference, so don't do that. Make sure that if you see it, you say something. So then, going back to our hypothetical with the Queen's Castle, then you're allowed to do your May action. Now this is a May to draw a card, so if you draw a card before you resolve your May effect for the Queen's Castle, you have chosen not to. So make sure that you're clear with what you're drawing for. I'm drawing for Queen's Castle, I'm drawing for turn. If you wanted to draw 2 from both. Now, if you didn't want to draw from the Queen's Castle, you'd say, I am not drawing for Queen's Castle, I'm drawing for turn. So you want to be as completely transparent with your opponent as possible. So those interactions with locations, those are the required actions. The effect granted by the Queen's Castle, that's going to be an effect thrown into the bag. That is not a required action. Once the required action is completed, game state check occurs again. Ability, yeah, exactly. So abilities that trigger as a result of game state check are added to the bag. Went over this. Go back to yellow. If multiple required actions happen at once, single combined. Okay, so that's what we talked about. Now these are following game state checks that create required actions, right? So I did talk about locations a little bit. If a player has 20 or more lore, they win the game. If a player must draw a card from a deck with no cards, you immediately lose the game. And if a character or location has damage equal to or greater than its willpower, the character or location is banished. That's important. If a location has damage equal to or greater its power, yeah. So this is just a repeat of above, including locations. Basically, banishing happens, and that's a required action and is resolved before any bag actions. So, damage a character, thrown into the bag, and it has a thing that gets thrown in the bag as it's banished. The required action will still finish before you get to choose that bag action. Okay, so this is interesting. If a character in a challenge is removed from the challenge for any reason, that challenge ends. All while challenging effects and the game proceeds. So at the moment, there's not like a card that you play that removes them from a challenge. Because nothing happens at instant speed. So the challenge would need to resolve before you can play something. However, effects do happen at instant speed. No, they don't. I'm sorry. Disregard that. So if a character has a challenge is removed from the challenge for any reason, that challenge ends. So usually this is damage. Now there could be cards that release in the future that make this not be damage, so we'll see. We're going to ignore the multiplayer games because that's not about it. Before the game, building a deck, this is going to be your valid deck types. So this is going to be the valid deck types that you're looking for as a judge. So you know, this is the card list. Decks can only contain 2 colors, up to 4 cards, and can't contain any banned cards. This should all be in their deck list. So that would be part of the deck checks. Now, banned cards. Some cards may be banned from organized play. It says refer to the Disney Lorcana OP page for information on banned cards. Now, you can go here. This is where the site that I got all of these documents from. So just make sure that you're up to date on any cards that are banned. Which right now I don't think any cards are banned. But it's built into the rules just in case. Okay, great. So this is just kind of like overall gameplay. Just make sure you're familiar with how gameplay proceeds. I'm sure if you're trying to judge a Lorcana tournament, you're fairly certain about how gameplay happens. But this is, again, the niche of how it happens. So we're not going to worry too much about this. I assume you know basically how mulligan and all of that stuff works. So players are going to know it pretty well too. Game ends, 20 lore, or they draw a card. These are the 2 ways the game ends. That's it. Unless in the future there's a card that just says has a win condition on it. But that would be an addendum to the rules specific to that card, which currently there isn't. So these are the 2 ways that you can win at the moment. Just make sure. Okay, so this is going to be the turn structure. This is going to be where a lot of the confusion happens as a judge. So phases. Turns has 3 phases: beginning, main, and end of turn phase. This is going to be when a lot of those effects happen, which is why it's very important for you as a judge to understand these terms and how these would play out. So again, the beginning phase, this is where the player resets their cards as appropriate for their new turn. This is where all effects that end at the start of the player's turn end, and where effects that occur at the beginning of the start of their turn happen. Okay, so what the f does that mean? All effects that end at the start of a player's turn end. So, like, for example, someone plays a giant Elsa, and it's bounced to your turn, bounce back to them, and then bounce back to your turn. Now your cards can untap again, right? That's what it means. So effects like that and others happen there. The beginning phase has 3 steps. Ready, set, and draw. Which these are all effects, places that effects can happen, or you can deny abilities from yourself if you're not careful. So let's go ahead and go into the beginning phase before we go into the other 2. Because this is truly, the beginning and end phase is going to be where a lot of these effects happen, and a lot of your judge rulings are going to happen. Like, they can happen in the main phase too, but I feel like a lot of this, like points of contention, especially in tournaments, are going to happen in these 2 phases versus the main phase. Okay, so in the ready phase, ready, set, draw. This is all beginning. So ready, effects that would end at the start of your turn and at the start of your next turn end. So that's effects like Elsa and Jasper and other such effects. The active player readies all of their cards in play, unless they can't. Okay? So Elsa is an exception to that, right? So this is an example where cards are superseding the rules of the game. Okay. So for example, let's go back to the Queen's Castle, for example. So that card says at the beginning of your turn, if you have 1 or more characters here, then you draw a card you may draw a card for as many characters as you have there, right? Okay, so if you decide to take the card from the queen's castle. This happens at the beginning, the very beginning. So this is so this happens right after this. So you ready? Then you set. Ready, set. And then this is where it happens, right here. Well, let's make that a little bit easier to see. Active player gains lore from locations with a characteristic they have in play. Right here. Right after you gain lore from your locations. Boom. Effects that would occur at the start of your turn or at the beginning of your turn, and abilities that triggered during the ready step are added to the bag. Okay, so you do ready. All of this stuff happens. Then your character's on tap, and you gain lore from locations. Then, after all of that has happened, effects that would occur at the start of your turn or at the beginning of your turn, and abilities triggered during the ready step, so this, are added to the bag. So, right? So all of this happens right before you draw. So, draw. This is a key thing here. Drawing. You need to be super careful about your draw. Because drawing is gonna, if you decide to draw before you resolve a May ability in the bag, you have decided to not do that ability. Okay? So the Queen's Castle example, if you don't draw the cards for the characters in your Queen's Castle before you draw for your turn, you don't get the additional draw from the Queen's Castle. So be extremely careful if you're playing this tournament. I expect stuff like this to be a lot of what you interact with as a judge. So, drawing is when a player takes the top card of their deck and puts it into their hand. Putting a card into a hand from any other zone besides the deck is not considered a drawing. Now that's going to be important too, because some cards have effects based off of that. Okay, we all know first player, first turn of the game doesn't draw a card. And once all effects have been resolved, so the bag is empty, and there are no more waiting to be added, the game moves into the main phase. Okay, so now the main phase is where a player can play cards and choose to perform any of the main phase turn actions, which we know are putting a card into your ink, playing a card, questing, and challenging. So these are all going to be very important for you as a judge. Oh yeah, moving a character to a location, and then use other activated abilities on cards. So those are going to be all the things you can do. To recap what you can do on your main phase, put a card into the inkwell. You can only do one of those. Play a card. You can do as many of those as you want. You can quest. You can challenge. You can move to locations. Jesus Christ. You can move to a location, and you can use other activated abilities on cards. Now, there's a lot of stuff that can happen here. The main thing is going to be the resolution of the bag, which you as a judge just more or less need to be aware of how things trigger, which abilities are added to the bag, and then ensuring that the active player resolves all of theirs before the opposing player does. And if the opposing player has an ability in the bag that affects and triggers an ability for the active player, it'll bounce back to the active player, allow them to resolve the active ability, or their active player's ability in the bag before it bounces back to the opponent to finish their bag resolution. Now, most of the time this is going to be like one or two things, but it can be more, and that's where it's going to get confusing. But always active player first. TLDR. I assume you know basic stuff about the game, like drawing and stuff like that, so we're not going to go over stuff like that. Just make sure you're familiar with stuff like ready, exerted, damaged, and undamaged. Damaged and undamaged are going to be a little bit more important, because there are cards that have effects related to this. So you need to make sure that the move is legal, right? So we know characters cards. This just gives a breakdown of character cards, action cards, and item cards, location cards, and all of that stuff. We know what abilities are. But there's an important thing with abilities. So each clause of a card is a separate effect. So like let's go up here, for example, let's see, the Bayou. So okay, I don't know if you guys can see this Bayou, but it says whenever a character quests while here, you may draw a card, then choose and discard a card. So you would draw the card, that effect happens, then you choose and discard a card, that effect happens. And that happens before you can play another card. Or let's see if we can get another example with a card. Yeah, there's no good examples here. Oh, this is an interesting interaction that I read through when I was reading through this rules. So I'm going to go through it with you guys because I thought it was incredibly fascinating and it kind of broke my brain a little bit. So let's just say the active player declares their marshmallow. So the active player is playing this purple marshmallow card and is challenging the opposing character's green Cheshire Cat. Cheshire Cat's ability reads, when this character is challenged and banished, banish the challenging character. Marshmallow's ability reads, when this character is banished a challenge, you may return it to your hand. So Marshmallow has 5 attacks, so he deals 5 damage to Cheshire Cat, knocking him out, right? Boom. Triggers Cheshire Cat's ability and adds it to the bag. Okay. Now, the bag has something in it. So before the challenge is officially declared over, the bag needs to be empty. It has to be empty. So the opponent resolves the ability's effect, banishing Marshmallow. But because Marshmallow is banished while in the challenge, Marshmallow's ability, boom, thrown up into the bag. Okay? So now Marshmallow can come back to your hand because he was banished by Cheshire Cat's ability while in a challenge. Now that there's no abilities left in the bag and the bag is empty, the challenge is over. So that's very important. It's going to be little stuff like that. That's going to be, you know, where you're called over as a judge. Like, because Cheshire Cat's ability happened during a challenge and Marshmallow's ability, let's see if I can zoom in on these cards a little bit for you guys. There you go. Alright, so Marshmallow. When this character is banished in a challenge, you may return this card to your hand. When this character is challenged and banished, which it was by Marshmallow, banish the challenging character. So these are both cards, because this is going to throw the ability into the bag, and it's going to banish Marshmallow while still in the challenge. The challenge is not over until the bag is empty and all of the effects from the challenge have resolved. So now this bounces Marshmallow's effects into the bag, which it's a May ability, so you need to be careful and make sure you don't miss the May. If you miss the May and you throw them into your the player throws it into their graveyard, then they chose not to, and that's how that's going to resolve. But this is a must. When this character is challenged and banished, banish the challenging character. So that's going to be important. When this character is challenged and banished, banish the challenging character. There is no may clause in here, which means that this has to happen. So Cheshire Cats has to happen, and this is going to happen during the challenge phase on the opposing players from this Cheshire Cats. So it's one of those niche things where you need to kind of pay a lot of attention as a player. But as a judge, that's going to be the kind of stuff you run into. This one's more self-explanatory version of that. You got Rafiki in here who has Challenger +3. So he deals 3 damage. And he's challenging this Shenzi. But he's challenging a Hyena, which on his card it says he can. He takes no damage from the challenge, even though Shenzi's at a location and has +3. Rafiki still takes no damage because he doesn't take damage from Hyenas. Only when he's challenging it. Shenzi can still attack Rafiki and deal damage to him. Okay? Great. I'm going to zoom out so I get a little bit more of the page. So it's going to be stuff like that. And then we proceed to the end of turn phase. So to end a turn, must be no abilities currently waiting to resolve. This is the bag. Active player declares the end of their turn and creates the start of the end of the turn phase. So this is important. Active player declares the end of the turn. Communication is very important for this. So players, if you're playing, be very careful about what you say because the opponents are looking for that. Trust me, they are. So this is all the end of turn effects. So like support ends, like some resist effects will end, stuff like that. So effects that would occur at the end of turn and end of your turn and abilities that are triggered by those effects are added to the bag. Now, these are still end of turn abilities, which means that there's the active player who is ending their turn gets to resolve their stuff first. Okay? And then it's cleanup, and then the bag is empty, and then it passes to the opposing player, making them the active player. Okay, great. And then they get to do all of their beginning of turn stuff that we already went over. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get down past here. You guys are going to be familiar with all of the breakdown of a card, ink cost, names, and so on and so forth. Now names with the, I don't know that you're going to run into this because the Sorcerer's Hat isn't meta at the moment, but the Sorcerer's Hat allows you to pay 1, name a card, and then if it matches, draw it. So the name that it's looking for on this card is going to be this top one, not the flavor text beneath. So just the top one. So any card named Elsa could be drawn as a result of that, as long as Elsa is the card that's named. So songs are both an action and a song. So any comboing with, like when you play an action, songs count as that. And like there's a Dr. Facilier card that immediately comes to mind that allows you to look at the top 2 cards, put one on top, one on bottom, if a song was played that turn. That's more specific. Songs are more specific versions of actions. So not just because you played an action, but it had to be because you played a song. Okay, great. So songs have to have action and song because songs are actions. We know how to play songs, tapping players, whatever. You can only sing songs from your hand, unless the card says otherwise. Right? Which at the moment none do. But, oh, an example of this, actually, player may only sing a song from their hand. The exception to this right now is there is a legendary green Ursula. She is, I believe, a 3 cost and can sing up to 3 cost songs, right? Okay. What makes that Ursula card special? Well, she gets to sing it once, and then it goes to your graveyard, and then she sings it again from the graveyard. So that's an exception, right? And that's where the card rules take precedence over the game rules. Okay, this is the location stuff that I was talking about earlier. We know about move costs of locations. We know about the willpower for locations. Move cost, willpower. And then lore value, right? Now this is the important bit about the lore value. A location may have a lore value, which is how much lore its player gains at the start of the turn during the set step. So this happens during the set step, and it must happen. It must happen. It must happen. I cannot tell you enough. This must happen. Don't let players gaslight you. It has to happen. Okay? Alright, and then if a location has ability, the ability can be used during the turn the location is played. So, like for example, when the character quests while here, you may draw a card. So you play the location, characters can immediately move to it, and then your character can quest here, triggering this effect down here. Okay. Alright. Cards with multiple effects and a single clause resolve based on the intervening word. So here we go. Example, you may have up to 99 copies of Dalmatian Puppy Tail Wagger in your deck. Simple, straightforward, only one thing is happening. You can only have up to 99 copies. Or you can have up to 99 copies. So then there's the A to B. The player must complete the first part. If they're unable to, they can't perform the second part. So, for example, this is Teeth and Ambition. Deal 2 damage to chosen character of yours to deal 2 damage to another chosen character. This means you can't play this card if you don't have a character on the board for you to deal damage to. So, now, this is... Yeah, so both parts of these conditions need to be true. So both you and your opponent need to have a character in order for this to have any effect at all. Alright, A then B. Resolve all effects as much as possible, even if some of the effects can't be resolved. So, draw 2 cards, then choose and discard 2 cards. Okay. So let's say... even if some of the effects can't be resolved, this is not a good example, because if you draw 2 cards, then choose and discard 2 cards, you're always going to be able to discard 2 cards. It would just be the 2 cards you've drawn. Now, a lot of the times, and this is actually a little important little tidbit too, if you play something where you draw 2 cards, then choose and discard 2 cards, and you have something that triggers that allows you to draw another card, you finish resolving, that trigger gets thrown up into the bag, you finish resolving the drawing 2 and discarding 2, and then you can choose to draw the 1 from that trigger. After you finish resolving this. This is a really bad example of A then B. A better example would be like Genie, the new Genie from set 3. Uninkable 4 cost. When he quests, you may shuffle him back into your deck to draw 3 cards. That's a better A than B. So first you quest, then you shuffle, and as a result of the shuffle, draw 3 cards. That's much better. That's much better. Alright, A and B. Both effects must be resolved. If one effect can't resolve for any reason, neither effect resolves. Okay, choose the character of yours and gain lore equal to their lore value. Simple and straightforward. If you don't have a character, you can't do it. Right? So choose a character of yours. Can't choose a character, then you can't gain lore equal to their value. Right? So these are the 2 clauses, A and B. A, then B, A to B, A to B. Okay. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. This is just like A. Okay. Alright, hopefully that made sense. If any ability or effect contains the word may, the player who generated the effect can choose whether they want it to happen. Like I was saying about the Queen's Castle earlier. If the player chooses to not have it happen, then no part of you may clause is performed. So like I was saying earlier with the Queen's Castle, if you draw a card for turn, before you resolved the effect for the Queen's Castle, you have chosen not to take part in it. Okay, so triggered abilities occur when the trigger condition is met. Trigger only once per trigger condition that's met. Triggered abilities when, whenever, at the start of, at the end of. Okay, these are stuff that players will be looking out for, and I'm sure stuff that you'll be called over. Alright. Activated abilities, this is like on cards typically. Like you'll pay on an item, or like pay 1 to gain lore with the Sorcerer's Spellbook. Stuff like that. Okay, so activated abilities, this is going to be kind of important. Order of operations for players. While no effects... Okay, activated abilities occur... Or activated abilities are abilities that a player chooses to use. While there are no effects waiting to resolve, the active player may use an activated ability. This is on cards and stuff. Right? They got to pay for it. If any part of the process can't be performed, then they can't do it. Only active player may choose to use abilities. First, the active player announces the ability. Then, they determine the total cost of the ability. Add any additional costs. Subtract amount of any cost reduction. So your cards like Dock and Pluto and Lantern are going to be typical for like characters, or other cards for items, like, or Sorcerer's Mickey for brooms and stuff like that. Then the cost will become fixed. Then the player pays the cost. If it includes ink, the player exerts a number of ink cards equal to that. And you can pay the cost in any order, but you must pay the cost completely. So if it's like, I don't know, here's a hypothetical. Like if it was pay ink and discard a card and banish an item, for example, which I don't think exists in the game currently, but you could choose to pay any of those 3 costs in any order, but you have to pay all of them. Okay, once the total cost is paid, ability is activated and the player resolves the effect immediately. If an effect would trigger as a result of any of the steps to using a triggered ability, the effect's wait to resolve until the ability is fully resolved. Okay, so basically what this says is, like, say you play cards, you pay the cost, and by paying the cost you trigger abilities for cards. Those get thrown up into the bag, and then while it's resolving, any triggers that happen for the cards get thrown up into the bag. And then once the ability that you're paying for is fully resolved, then you get to start making your choices out of the bag for those. Static abilities are stuff that sit on the field, stuff like ward, or like resist, stuff like that. Okay, so those are pretty straightforward. Yeah, these are super straightforward. The cards basically tell you each time. Replacement effects. Some effects are considered replacements. The effects wait for stated condition to occur and then partially or completely replace the event. Okay. Abilities that... Okay, occur then partially complete. Okay. Ugh, it's really hard to tell you what this means without an example. But I think definitely have these rules with you. This will be like super easy for you to spot when it happens. And players are, I think they're going to be pretty good about noticing when this happens too. Abilities that include the word instead are replacement effects. Yeah. It's the most common types of replacement effects. Okay, oh yeah, here we go. Yeah. Okay, here we go. So, Stolen Scimitar. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Your chosen character gets +1 attack this turn. If a character named Aladdin is chosen, he gets +2 instead. So stuff like that. So super easy. Abilities that read this character enters or this character may enter are replacement effects. Replacement effects happen once and need to exist before the event would occur. If an event is replaced, so this is talking about stuff like Merlin Goat and stuff like that. If an event is replaced, it never happens. A modified event occur, and the new event may trigger abilities. Abilities that would have triggered from the original event don't see it, and therefore don't trigger. Yep. That's going to be a little tough one. So save this piece. I'm sure you'll refer to it later. Characters with negative power are treated as having none. So you don't restore health by people hitting them. That's not how that works. Okay. We know play zones. Hand, play, inkwell, discard, and the bag. Okay. Those are it. These are the general keywords for that. For a bunch of these. So be familiar with all these keywords. They're located at the very end of this document. Okay, so now tournament rules. This is going to be... Hopefully I have enough time to finish this video. I didn't think before my shift. Okay. So I'm going to kind of go a little bit over this. Tournament types. We are playing a pre-constructed tournament. Eligible players and tournament officials. As a judge, you are not eligible. Head judge and judges. So we'll go over kind of what that means. We're not going to worry too much about the player and round minimums. We've kind of already went over that in the beginning document. We'll go over concessions and intentional draws. People should be doing this with the event organizer, but you will be performing deck checks. So that's going to be the important things for you as a judge, as well as these. Information and communication. This is going to be really big. And then time limits, of course. So, okay, great. So let's go ahead and fast forward to 2.2. Every Disney Lorcana trading card game tournament must have a tournament official designated as the head judge for this event. This person must be physically present throughout the duration of the event. For casual tournaments, the tournament organizer may serve as the head judge. For competitive tournaments, they must be two separate individuals. So the tournament that I'm judging need to be two separate officials. The head judge is the final arbiter for any rules of the tournament policy disputes at Disney Lorcana trading card game tournaments. It is their responsibility to enforce the codes in this document and the rules and the play correction guidelines. All tournament participants are expected to abide by head judge decision. For smaller tournaments, head judge should be the only judge needed. For larger tournaments, the head judge is expected to delegate tasks to other judges as necessary to facilitate smooth tournament function and timely responses to players' questions. Okay, so this is going to be like the tournament that's being held in Texas or Las Vegas. These are huge tournaments where like hundreds of people come. So there is a head judge, but there are also tons of floor judges. And so largely, unless it's like grievous, the judge's ruling is going to be final most of the time. If any players must be disqualified or otherwise removed from a tournament, head judge must write a report of the incident and submit it to Ravensburger. So that's an additional responsibility for the head judge. Okay? So if you're a head judge for your tournament, you must write a report of the incident and submit it to Ravensburger. Judges. Judges are charged with assisting players with rules or questions and handling errors made during play. They're expected to be impartial and to avoid assisting players with in-game strategy. So this means like, hey, you're not hovering, you'll be called over, and they'll have questions about how an effect is going to resolve, or if there was an error made, how to go about correcting this, right? Okay, so that's going to be your job as a judge. You don't prevent play mistakes from happening, but only pause a match if an illegal action is taken, which will be brought up to you by players, or if a situation requires de-escalation. So players can get kind of heated at each other, so that's what that means. So that's when you would pause a match. You would perform actions to like bring everybody down, and then you want to do so in a way what Lorcana calls a high standard of sporting behavior. So you want to be nice, you want to be friendly, you want to be understanding, you want to be considerate of how other people are feeling in that moment, because just like brute forcing and bulldozing over the situation with your ruling, it might make things worse. So tread carefully there. Okay. So basically you want to be the standard of behavior that you want your players and spectators to show. Okay, great. So now we're going to keep going down. Oh, so this is interesting. Spectators. Yeah, so players are expected to do this. So, I mean, communicate this with your players before they go about doing stuff. Spectators are allowed. They must remain silent and unobtrusive while the matches proceed. As a judge, it's going to be your responsibility to kind of oversee this and make sure that that's happening. But spectators can observe a rule violation, and they can ask players to pause their game and notify a judge. Spectator should not be communicating any of what they've seen happen to the players. And players can always choose or ask that spectators not watch their match. And the request should involve a judge. So if players are requesting that, it's your responsibility as a judge to be there to witness and then to enforce. Okay, so we kind of already went over this in the other thing, match structure, match procedure. We kind of understand this. However, there's an interesting thing here. Once time has been called, any game still in progress will immediately proceed to end of match procedure as follows. Active player finishes their turn. After that turn, 5 total turns remaining in the game. Each turn taken after the turn during which time was called will count toward the 5 game total, regardless of whose turn it is. So basically, active turn, then turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, game done. If the game ends during those turns, match is reported normally. If neither player has won the game at the end of the turn 5 and one player has more game wins than the other, that player wins the match. Okay, so what that means is if y'all are in the second match and the second match goes over, because this is best 2 out of 3, right? Then whoever won the first game, if you're in OT on the second match, is going to go to that first player, regardless of lore totals. If you both, so say you're on turn 3 and you both have a game win, regardless of match or a lore count during that match, it's going to be a draw for that game, or the match, yeah. Single elimination rounds. If neither player's won the game at the end of the 5 turn and both players have the same number of game wins. Oh, so it's Swiss rounds. So this is if you're in your first one. If your first game is taking 50 minutes and you're both 0-0, then it's a draw. If you're 1-1 and neither player's won the game at the end of turn and both players have the same number of game wins and the same lore, the match continues until one player has more lore than the other. Once this happens, player with the highest lore wins the game immediately. So that's only, that's only if you're in match 3, you're 1-1, and you have the same exact lore. Otherwise, we're going to go back to this one, and it'll be considered a draw. Interesting, right? Oh, no. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Disregard that. This is 0-0. This is 1-1. And the person with more lore than the other is going to win. I think. Oh, gosh. But it's going to be your job as the judge to determine this, which one you're going to be using. So I like the lore one personally because it feels a little more fair, but it's not always. So I don't know. Up to you as the judge on that one. It's your interpretation of these rules, right? So that's you as the judge. Okay. Concessions. Player may concede an incomplete game at any time. The player immediately loses the game and moves on, and the match moves on to the next game. A player who refuses to play a match is considered to have conceded. Because maybe they don't want to, maybe they're being bitter, and they don't want to play, and they're trying to draw out the clock because they're ahead. Call over a judge. Player, they're like, hey, this guy hasn't played in like 5 minutes. He's just sitting here. And then you're like, well, is this true? And you'll probably notice this. They'll probably be like leaning back in their chair with their arms crossed and shit like that. So you'll probably notice this as a judge. They're considered to have conceded the match at that point, because that's not cool. Even if they're ahead. Okay, players aren't allowed to ask for a concession or offer rewards if their opponent concedes. And if someone is provided an offer like that, call a judge over and report the offer. Prior to the end of a match, players may agree to draw the match. A player may only request an intentional draw once per match and may not implicitly or explicitly offer any reward or consideration in the exchange for the draw. Players provided such an offer are required to call a judge and report the offer. Okay, great. Deck registration, they should do all of that beforehand, but then it's your job to perform a deck check, whatever, a deck check here. Judges, and that's performed by judges. Tournaments will perform deck checks as much as is feasible. Decks should be checked after shuffling has completed, but before opening hands are drawn. Deck checks are intended to verify that players playing the correct deck as registered on their deck list. So yeah, this happens before they even draw their opening hand, but after shuffling has completed. Yep. All right, great. Player may drop from the tournament at any time. Player responsible for either dropping themselves using the melee or informing the judge or scorekeeper. Okay, great. If a player drops during a limit, we're not worried about limited tournaments. We're playing pre-constructed. Okay, great. Electronic devices. At casual tournaments, players may use the TCG app. However, we're not a casual tournament. We're going to be playing a competitive tournament, which means electronic devices capable of long-term data storage and or internet access are not permitted. So this means like you can bring your like Remarkable tablet or something like that, but not an iPad. So stuff like that. So like stuff that's going to go. I don't know how Remarkable works, to be honest with you. If it stores data long-term, it's a no. So like basically it wants it to mimic pen and paper for your electronic devices, or like a counter. So like you bring in a counter or a timer or something like that. Those are okay. In-game information. So this is what I was talking about earlier. Players are expected to communicate openly. Adding an ink, you got to show and allow your opponent that there is ink. And this also allows the opponent to keep track of the cards that are being added to your inkwell. Current status of any card in play needs to be openly communicated and correctly communicated. And this can also mean whenever it's requested by another player. So it should happen when it's happening and when it's requested by your opponent. When a player has multiple simultaneous actions to resolve, the player must announce the order of resolution before resolving the first one. The order cannot change once the first action has begun. So this is referring to the bag, right? So a bunch of things are thrown in the bag. You got to say, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And then that's going to happen. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 right? Okay, great. Exerted cards should be rotated 90 degrees clockwise to indicate their status, right? This is exerted. But it needs to be rotated consistently the same direction. So you can choose to rotate it counterclockwise if you want to, but it needs to, you always need to do whatever direction you choose. The same for all of your cards. Lore gains are always announced, and include your new lore total after the lore increase for that player. This ensures that both players fully understand the current lore score. Any discrepancies found should be remedied as soon as possible. So this is locations, and this can be used with the help of the judge. Players can also do this on their own, though. You don't need to be there. Players are expected to maintain a clear game state. So, as a judge, corrective actions will happen when players are not maintaining a clear game state. Mandatory effect is one that does not include the word may. This is like location gains, for example. Failing to remind a player of may effects is not against the rules, but players are encouraged to remind their opponents of effects to foster a positive play experience, right? It's not cool if you have a may thing and your opponent is intentionally being like not saying anything, although it is a strategy and one that is perfectly legal for them to use. But like, come on guys, we're playing a Disney card game, like, be nice to each other, right? Okay, players are required to keep their inkwell distinct. So basically what this is saying is you need to, okay, there's so much with this, and you can be called over. If there's ever, here, let's get rid of this. This is the important bit. If there's ever any confusion about which cards are in a player's inkwells, the player should call a judge immediately so the error can be remedied. Okay, great. Constructed overview. 60 cards, no maximum deck size, but you have to be able to shuffle the deck in a timely manner without assistance. Okay, great. Must not contain cards from more than 2 ink colors. Must not contain more than 4 of a single card. Unless it's the Dalmatian card that says that you can. Okay, right. Okay, great. Time limit 50 minutes. Okay. Recommended that all matches are in single elimination rounds are untimed. If a time limit must be imposed. Oh, okay, I got it. Single elimination rounds. That's referring to the thing earlier. So, if it is tied and there's a lore discrepancy at 1-1, then it's still a draw. Okay. If all matches have finished before the time limit is up and around, the head judge may choose to start the next round early. Yes, we can. Yay! No players should be issued a tardiness penalty if they arrive before the previous round would have ended. Okay, so basically there's a penalty for tardiness, but if the head judge chooses to start early, there's no tardiness penalty. It just basically means that the round's a bit, you know, yeah. So there's no tardiness penalty in that case if we choose to start the round early. So more oftentimes than not, we'll just wait out the 50 minutes. That way, there's no, like, someone finished their matches early, they went to go get a drink, and now they're late as a result. Like, no, that's not cool. We're not worried about limited. So that's more or less the tournament rules. And then this is going to be the big one for judges. Is going to be this play correction guidelines. These are going to be entirely at your discretion, and I'd highly recommend you print this out and bring it with you because there's a lot of information in here, but we'll go ahead and go over it, okay? Anyways, but this is what you as a judge are going to be doing. So this is it. Oh yeah, I'd like to draw. Okay, great. So right, so we've went over the tournament rules here already. So, corrective actions. Okay. This is the most basic level of corrective action. The player is cautioned. So, caution, warning, game loss, match loss, disqualification. Okay, so these are all of the things that we as a judge can do in terms of corrective actions, including rewinding a game if we feel it's appropriate. Okay. So it'll kind of go over different things that happen. But let's just get familiar with the basics, okay? So a caution is the most basic level of corrective action. Player is cautioned verbally by you as the judge that they should play more carefully to avoid making this error in the future. You don't track or record it. Okay, so it's not tracked or recorded. The second one is a warning. Player receives a verbal warning that they have committed an error and should be more careful in the future. The warning is recorded and tracked, and it may be upgraded if further errors are committed in the same tournament. Okay? So this is really important for you. If you're issuing warnings as a judge, you need to be tracking that. The player, what kind of warning you have given them, right? Okay, great. Game lost. The player immediately loses the game currently in progress. If this corrective action is applied between games, then the player loses the next game that they would play. So basically, yeah, I don't foresee this one happening a lot, but this is why it's good to have this printed. If both players would receive a game loss for the same game, instead corrective actions are recorded, but the game is played as normal. This is known as offsetting corrective actions. So like if they both got a game loss, instead of them getting a game loss, they would now get to play against each other because they both have game losses. But of course that's up to Melee on how it pairs the opponents, but I doubt you'll see that a lot. So a match loss. This is different than a game loss. So basically, this is loading into a match. This is loading into another game with the same opponent. Okay, so this is same. This is different. Okay. If both players would receive a match loss for the same match, the corrective actions do not offset and both players are given a loss. Okay. That's the main difference. No offset. There is an offset for a game. There is not an offset for a match. Okay. As a judge, you also have the ability to disqualify someone. The player immediately loses the match currently in progress and is dropped from the tournament. Look, guys, be really careful when you're issuing corrective action. Make sure that you are very thorough in how you deliver your corrective action, explaining fully what's happening. And basically, you want to manage the player's emotions here because if you disqualify someone, they're going to be pissed. I promise. But yeah, you need to fully communicate the reason for the corrective action and why the particular infraction applies in that situation. So that's why you want this document printed. Like I personally am going to print out this document and I'm going to have it inside a binder with those like where you slip the papers into like these plastic covers. And then I'm going to have an expo marker so I can really draw out what's happening per scenario and so the players can see it. Because we want to be as transparent as possible when delivering any corrective action. Now this doesn't just mean players, it can be applied to spectators too. And if the spectator was or is a player in the tournament, corrective action can be added in Melee, which can affect their matches if they're spectating someone else, okay? Otherwise, for significant issues, a brief report can be filed here. So you want to include the event, player, spectator information, a brief description. So again, print this out. This is going to be your friend as a judge. This document is like everything. You have your good understanding of basic rules of the game and how the game affects the bag, all this stuff. And I assume, since you're wanting to be a judge for this, that you're already familiar with all that stuff. So this is going to be like how you deliver on what you've decided, right? So I'm going to have the comprehensive rules printed out, the tournament rules printed out, and the play corrective actions printed out, and that way I can use my expo in this binder to really show the players why I'm saying what I'm saying. Okay, so rewinding a game. Several infraction remedies include the instruction of rewind the game. When rewinding a game, every action should be carefully reversed one at a time in order to reset the game back to the point where the error occurred. Okay. Judges start from the most recent action and work backwards, returning the game to a previous state. If rewinding through a card draw, a random card should be sent back to the player's deck if the identity of the drawn card was not known to both players. Okay, so basically, if only the player who drew the card knows what it is, then it's a random one, so that the opposing player is in a disadvantage. But if it's known by both players, then it just, the one that is agreed on by the players is the one that goes to the top of the deck. Okay? Guys, not all errors should involve a rewind. We don't want to rewind the game if we can avoid it. If rewinding the game is likely to result in a significantly different decision being made due to the introduction of a new random element, this is the evidence you're looking for that a rewind should not be performed. Okay. Introduction of a new random element. Yeah. Like a whole new world or something like that. This is strong evidence that a rewind should not be performed. Generally, rewinding through more than 2 turns should be strongly discouraged. Because why would you want to do that? That sucks. Unless every action was taken was very simple. Like, oh, I quested for 1, and they quested for 2. Okay, great. Only the head judge may authorize a rewind. So if you're not a head judge, you're not issuing rewinds. If you are a head judge, make sure you're very familiar with this, okay? If you're a head judge, make sure you know what's happening in there, okay? Hidden sets. Okay, what is a hidden set? So, the Disney Lorcana has a unique challenge when it comes to the existence of hidden sets. Each player's inkwell is face down and a set of cards that should be mostly known to both players, but can still be easily confused if a player sets another hidden set of cards, like their hand, down on the table nearby. Players are required to treat the situation with care, but this will not prevent errors from occurring. So basically, you should probably have a hand marker. I usually like some sort of token that you just place on top of your hand. That way you can easily distinguish it, because I set my hand down a lot when I play games. Okay. So whenever the handling a situation that involves a hidden set, such as inkwells, judges must investigate to determine as much information as possible about the hidden set in order to come to the best resolution. Players are required to announce and reveal every card they add to their inkwell using the once per turn action, so most, if not all, of a player's inkwell should be known information. Now we do have like one jump ahead and fishbone and other sort of stuff where that's hidden. Yeah, it's hidden information you don't know. So that's why it's most. Okay, rule errors. If a player receives the 3rd warning within a single category of rule error, so each one of these is a rule error category, so 2.1, 2.2, so on and so forth. They have up to 3 warnings within a single category before upgrading to a game loss. So this is per game. Oh, no, sorry. No. This is in a tournament. So, okay, this is in a tournament. If a player receives a 3rd warning within a single category of rule error in a tournament, so not just the game you're playing, but the entire tournament, that 3rd warning should be upgraded to a game loss. So whatever opponent you're playing, you'll lose a game against. So like if you make it into the top 8 and you get a third warning, you just get a game loss straight off rip because you're doing bad stuff. Like, ugh, that's on you. Okay. So instead of if the player receives 2 card count error warnings, the third card count error warning is upgraded to a game loss. If the player has received 2 card count English. If they receive 2 of the card count error warnings and then receives an inkwell error, the third warning should not be upgraded because it's a different type, right? General rule. Okay. Player sees a card they were not allowed to see, such as a card in their inkwell. Okay, so corrective action, you warn them, which we're going to be talking about competitive more specifically. That's what we're looking at here. Okay, so if the card is seen, add to the inkwell through the normal once per turn, reveal the card to the opponent, then return to the inkwell. Okay, great. If the card was added by other means, reveal it to the opponent, then shuffle it into the player's deck and replace it with a random card from that deck. Okay? In either case, strongly reinforce that looking at cards in your inkwell is against rules. Further violations should be handled as unsporting and cheating. So this one upgrades really fast. Okay. Yep. So basically, yeah, you go straight to cheating if this happens more than once. Okay. If the scene card was not in an inkwell, but is hidden information, shuffle it into a random portion of its owner's library. Okay. Card count error. Players an incorrect number of cards in their hand or inkwell. So basically, case by case, just follow this. Okay? This is what, just print it out. I promise you. Just case by case, follow what this is saying. If a player has too few cards in their hand, instruct them to draw cards, so on and so forth. If a player's inkwell contains too few cards, investigate. Player's inkwell contains too many cards, investigate. And this is all going to be done as you as the judge, okay? So, like, print this out. Understand, like, the types of warnings associated with each, how to identify each. Okay? Most of them are just going to be warnings, and so understand what it means. Like this general rule area, here's a big one. Player commits an in-game rule violation that does not fall under inkwell errors or card count errors. Okay? Player missing an effect that uses the word may has not committed the infraction, right? Like we were talking about the Queen's Castle. If they missed the may, they just missed it. But like with location gaining lore, you can't miss it. It's not a may. Okay, tournament errors. Player receives a second warning within a single category of tournament errors. In a tournament, that second warning should be upgraded to a game loss. These are much more hardcore than the basic ones up here. Rule errors. Okay, so what are tournament errors? I'm not going to break these down in depth. I'm running a little bit short on time for my own personal responsibilities today. So, what you should know. Okay, what you should know in here, tardiness. Up to 10 minutes late. If they're playing too slow. Takes an inordinately long amount of time. Warning here. This is just a pretty straight cut corrective action. Deck error. Warning for competitive. Deck error major. Immediate match loss. Not game, match. So this is, yeah. This is a big deal. Now, this is the only way to modify your decks after you've gotten into a tournament, by the way. Limited error. Okay. Warning. Communication error. Warning. Giving bad information. I think that should be more than a warning personally. As long as if it's like maliciously, you know, like they continue to do it. I guess it's a warning. Whatever. Marked cards. This is a big no-no. If that happens, you just ask them to replace sleeves or cards. Okay. Yeah, here you go. Replace sleeve or cards. If the tournament is at competitive, the corrective action should be upgraded to a game loss. So basically, okay, so this is an important one with marked cards. If they're marked, if the head judge determines that the marked cards are identifiable easily enough to be significantly abused, replace the sleeves immediately, and you get a game loss. So yeah, that's important. So if that's brought to your attention, get the head judge and they will do this immediately. Okay, a player or spectator gives information hidden while playing the match. Just match loss. You just immediately lose that match. Doesn't matter what game, you lose the match. And then if it's a spectator giving that information, then they are asked to leave. Which you need to document. Document, okay? Document it. That's fucking terrible spelling, but you got it. Okay, now there's another section. Like, this is again why I say, like, guys, really print these out so you have them with you. Unsporting conduct. Okay, minor. Understand what it is, and that's a warning. Now this is a type, so like, okay. So these are all tournament errors, and so there'll be a tournament warning. These are all general rule errors, so it's going to be warnings in those different errors. So just make sure you read this document, you truly understand what it's saying. I'd read it through a couple times, like 2 or 3 times, just to make sure that you're really understanding what it's saying. This is the infraction for unsporting. A player takes an action that could reasonably be expected to cause major discomfort or alienation, particularly with regard to discrimination based on protective classes. So if someone does this, like, you know, and players can report this to you, they immediately lose the match, like, and then you immediately separate them, and then it's your job to educate the player as to why that kind of behavior is not acceptable, and then if the player is unrepentant, which means like they're not like sorry for their outburst, to the TLDR, they don't feel any sort of remorse or anything, or they continue to be hot and aggressive, the head judge says that it should be upgraded to severe, which just means they're disqualified from the tournament. Because this kind of behavior is not acceptable, and like it makes you uncomfortable, makes the player that they're playing against uncomfortable, and it makes everybody at the tournament uncomfortable. Players, spectators, officials, like it makes everybody uncomfortable, so they're just disqualified and asked to leave. Now, if they refuse to leave, you can call the police on them. That's totally within your rights. So, yeah, if players are acting like this and they refuse to leave and they continue to be that way, then call the cops and the cops will come and handle the situation for you. Okay? And then definitely document that and document who it is, and then don't let them into your future tournaments. Cheating. Player intentionally breaks a game rule or tournament in order to gain an advantage. The infraction is also includes lying to tournament officials or intentionally playing slowly to take advantage of the time limit. That's a disqualification. So basically, I'm going to open up my tournament and be like, because the location rule is like especially to me, like if you're like maliciously withholding information and taking advantage of the fact that your opponent keeps forgetting their lore and you don't tell them, I'm going to consider that cheating, and I will disqualify you from the tournament for it. So like, pay attention to lore at locations, especially because it's a big deal. It's a big deal. One lore can make or break a match. So and now if an improper match result is submitted, so basically a player offers an incentive in exchange for a concession or accepts an offer, or a player determines a match result by outside a game method such as flipping a coin or rolling the die. So outside the game method, this means you're not playing through the game to figure it out who won by lore, right? That means that if it's the player who's offering the incentive in exchange for a concession, then that player will be disqualified. Or someone accepts an offer, then both of them would be disqualified. And then outside the match results, both of them are disqualified again. And the head judge is responsible for ensuring involved players are educated as to why that behavior is not unacceptable. Guys, it violates game integrity. It's like that simple. Like, we're playing to have fun, but it's also a competitive situation with rewards at stake. Like it's not cool. Like, I feel like everybody kind of universally understands that. And if they fail to understand that, try to seek understanding as to why they fail to understand that. Just ask them questions like, why do you feel XYZ way about that? And then go from there to try to reason why it's not acceptable, right? That's kind of what the head judge is involved with. So I know I didn't go over everything in this last bit of the document, specifically like these yellow ones. But the unsporting conduct we kind of dived into because it's very important. So make sure you understand tournament errors and then like these other errors and what kind of corrective action you should be taking. So you issue warnings mostly. And then know when to upgrade. So print this out. That way you can mark with like you could have multiple of them or whatever works for you. Like I'm printing them out and putting inside plastic sheets inside of a binder so that I can write with expo markers on them. So do whatever you need to do. These are the play correction guidelines. This is going to be really big for you as a judge. So make sure you understand these very well as you understand the comprehensive rules of the game very well. Okay? So I've been Jared here at the Peanut Gallery. Hopefully this was informative for you. If you'd like to see me dive into the play correction guidelines a little bit more in depth, like I'm sorry I ran out of time on these before I have to go to my my in quote 9 to 5. So please yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'll do my best to answer down below. And this is for the Lorcana Into the Inklands Championship match. This is the rules as they exist right now, right before them. So if you have questions, yes, please leave a comment down below. I will do my best to answer it in the comments. And until then, thanks for watching. Good luck judging your tournaments, guys.